Mr. Bujar Osmani, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
I would like to start with a question related to the EU accession talks. In March 2020, the European Union finally made the long-awaited and historic decision to start accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania. Do you think that this decision will increase the popularity of the European Union in North Macedonia and at the same time also hinder the rise of anti-European forces?
Well, first I think that EU credibility and popularity in North Macedonia was never actually substantially shaken. Our strategic goal, our geopolitical orientation, stone solid, and this is full membership into EU as soon as possible. And we deeply believe that this is the right choice, not only for us, but for the region and for EU itself. So there was never, and there is no single party or political leader that would dare to dispute this geopolitical orientation of ours. And this is simply because all polls that were conducted in the last 20 years, there is a 75 to 90% favorability for EU and NATO. North Macedonia was the first country in our region the Stabilization and Association Agreement back in 2001, a process that was initiated in Zagreb in 2000, 20 years ago. And then in 2004, we applied for candidacy status. In 2005, we were granted candidacy status. In 2009, the European Commission issued the first recommendation to the Council, start accession negotiations. And from then on, there were 10 consecutive recommendations from 2001 to 2019. Every single one was refused by the Council. But despite these difficulties, we never had a dilemma over our geopolitical orientation. In the last 20 years, we have gone through a heavy EU reform process. Every angle of our, so no angle of our society remained the same, actually. Several hundreds of EU acts were introduced in our legal system. Around 31% of the EU acquis is already transposed even without starting accession negotiations. Our trade is oriented toward EU. 75% of our trade volume is with member states. 3/4 of the non-EU member states. So to recapitulate our legal and institutional system, our trade relation, business communication, industrial technology, everything has long-lasting EU orientation. And to conclude, our region is surrounded by EU member states. And when you discuss the geopolitical orientation of North Macedonia, you have to consider the geography of the country.
Thank you very much. Let's remain on the European Union. In February 2020, the European Commission has presented a new enlargement methodology. Do you think that this new enlargement methodology can streamline the process for North Macedonia and also incentivize the country to make even more progress on its EU path?
Well, it was issued on February 5th, 2020. Its aim is, if I can put it in a sentence, is to reinvigorate the accession process by making it more predictable, more credible, more dynamic, stronger political steering based on objective criteria and more rigorous positive and negative conditionality and reversibility. We think that this process must return back to its aim, to its fundament, as accession-driven process, which aim is not only to enlarge EU, but rather to assist in its political unification and territorial reconsolidation with the Western Balkan in it. We see this process as a sort of two-way street, the strategic partnership. In one side, we have to comply with highest conditions and criteria at all levels. And on the other side, EU has to continue its reform in order to remain active and to be more efficient. So it has to work for both sides. And we think that these two-sided reforms can be done in parallel. At the end, any reform is not a beginning or end of something. It's actually, in this ever-changing world, reforms are existential matter, and I think we have learned the lesson. But to conclude, North Macedonia sees an opportunity in this new method for accelerated accession into EU. We are ready to do it. Our political elites are fully and consensually dedicated. Our administration is ready. We have put an organization in place, and we are just waiting for the momentum to have the first intergovernmental conference and to start the accession process. We just hope that this pandemic will not do further delays in the process.
Thank you very much. Beside the start of the EU accession talks, another historical breakthrough for the country occurred in March 2020 when North Macedonia became the newest NATO member. And I would also like to congratulate your government on that. May I ask you, what does NATO membership mean to the security of North Macedonia, especially considering its geopolitical position in the Western Balkans?
That in a single week, in March 2020, North Macedonia, to become the 30th NATO member, and also in the same week to receive the long-awaited decision to start accession negotiation. I think that for a small country as North Macedonia, full membership into NATO is a huge achievement. NATO for us means long-term security and political and economic, which is a precondition for foreign investment, which is a basis for our economy. I usually say has finally has finalized the demarcation, or has drawn the Article 5 line of protection of this region, and we finally belong to the security umbrella that this organization of nations that share similar values, and we think that we also can contribute into this system, which is of course difficult to create, difficult to maintain, but we think that having our geographic position as a crossroad country, we will be an important asset into this architecture of NATO.
So we discussed these two historical breakthroughs, NATO membership and the start of EU accession talks. I would like to ask you, will the recent progress in Euro-Atlantic integration for North Macedonia also improve inter-ethnic relations within the country?
North Macedonia is a fully functional, multi-ethnic and multicultural state that has left ex-Yugoslavia in a peaceful manner, but of course, a lot of open challenges, inter-ethnic challenges we had in the first decade successfully closed with signing of the Ohrid Framework Agreement back in 2001, an agreement that was implemented in the last 20 years, and we finally legislative piece that emerged from this agreement, and that is the language law that was adopted last year. I think that EU and NATO was the only, or one of the only glues that kept this society together, brought together the different political parties and created this synergy within the different ethnic and political lines. And this is the narrative that has subordinated all the conflicting narratives in the country in the last 20 years. And now, being the 30th NATO member and starting accession negotiations, even more will subordinate these narratives, and will create this synergy between the different groups, so we can continue to function as a normal, functional, multi-ethnic and multicultural state and society.
We came to our fifth and last question, and it is about the current pandemic and how North Macedonia is facing it. We have seen that during this current crisis, some countries have been either using disinformation campaigns or also aid diplomacy to influence, and in some cases also to destabilize some countries in the Western Balkans. So I would like to ask you, what is happening in North Macedonia, and are there external forces trying to influence or destabilize your country in this specific crisis?
Well, my role in the country is as well national coordinator for foreign aid. So I had the opportunity to communicate with different donors in different countries in order to secure as much support and donation for the needs of this pandemic. I can say that in the first days, EU was in a shock due to the severity of the attack of the pandemic in some member states. And even on the 14th of March, EU has adopted a regulation to ban export on medical supplies for the non-EU countries, including Western Balkan countries. This worried us at the beginning, since we thought if we cannot buy in EU market, how we can expect solidarity and donation. But soon, in a matter of days, I think that EU recovered itself and excluded Western Balkan from this ban and included us in all possible funds and mechanisms, like EU Solidarity Fund, like EU joint procurement for medical supply, EU civil mechanism. And in a period when I think multilateral institution and bilateral relations are put in test, EU has passed the test toward Western Balkans and North Macedonia. We had as well good cooperation with bilateral donors in this period of our geopolitical propaganda in order who is helping the region more. But I think I haven't seen attempt to destabilize country through this donor mechanism, but rather more to create an impression who is caring most about the region.
Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, thank you very much for this exchange and for the insightful contribution.